Courier Cat. Probably the most controversial unit added into the Battle Cats in 2022, if not the entire history of the game. Many things about Courier Cat make them very controversial, but before I get into why they're so controversial, I want to talk about Courier as a unit and how well it performs. Before I do start, if you enjoy the video, give it a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and comment about how you feel about Courier Cat. Anyways, let's talk about Courier. Courier Cat is a rare cat that you unlock by completing 5 of the Behemoth culling stages for the first time. Most players will usually get it by playing 4 of the forest stages and 1 of the desert stages. Once you beat these stages, you unlock an egg that you need to get to level 30 and acquire 5 red Behemoth Stones and 5 purple Behemoth Stones. Once these requirements are filled out, you now have access to Courier Cat. Kasurian Ahirujo was perfectly countered by Courier, and you have probably had to fight one to get its egg, but why is that? To answer that question, we have to look at Courier's stats at level 30. At level 30, Courier deals a decent 7,055 damage and has a nice 15,000 health with 3.3k DPS. These are really nice stats to have on a unit that you can get without needing to pull the gacha. However, this is just their base stats without any multipliers. When we look at them against red enemies, without any of the blood fruits, Courier still deals a nice 21,000 damage against red enemies with almost 10k DPS. These numbers go to 28,000 damage per hit with 13k DPS. Next, we need to quickly look at their performance against non-red Behemoth enemies. At level 30, they deal a pretty good 17,000 damage with 8k DPS. Since Behemoth Slayer grants both a damage and a health increase against Behemoth enemies, they also have about 25,000 health against Behemoth enemies. Now if we combine both numbers together, Courier can deal a massive 52,913 damage against red Behemoths. That doesn't factor in treasures, as this boosts the damage to 70,000 damage at level 30 against red Behemoths. These numbers are even crazier the higher you get Courier's level, dealing upwards to 112,000 damage against red Behemoths at level 50. Courier absolutely shreds through Ahirujo, who's currently the only red Behemoth enemy in the game as of version 12.0. One last thing before I get into the meat of the video, I want to quickly touch on their other stats. Courier has 2 knockbacks, which is an average amount for a unit like Courier, and it gives them a chance to reposition. They have a range of 250 with an LD of 175 to 400, meaning they can hit most red enemies that they face, but there are exceptions. They have an attack frequency of 2.13 seconds, which is pretty fast. They have a cooldown of 6.53 seconds, which is just over twice as long as Cameraman Cat, but it's still a pretty fast recharge. Courier has a price of 690, which is somewhat expensive for a rare unit, but still pretty cheap. Last is their speed, which is both a blessing and a curse. While their speed is great for allowing them to get into the fight faster, it can also cause them to range clip, causing their effective range to go down ever so slightly. It also causes your mid shields to fall behind greatly, with only Manic Mohawk being able to catch up. This tends to put Courier in harm's way. With all those extra stats outlined, we can get into the nitty-gritty of the video, where I discuss Courier's controversial reputation. It's no secret Courier has been one of the most power-creeping units in the game, having stats similar to a first form Ultra Soul that you can get even before completing Into the Future Chapter 2 for basically free has a ton of consequences. Every single red enemy in the early game becomes a pushover because of Courier's absurd DPS, and even in mid-SOL, the only red enemy Courier really struggles against is Professor A, but you could just pair it with Rocat to weaken him, and if slow doesn't proc, then you can easily take him out with just a couple of Couriers. Courier's LD also makes a ton of enemies easier to fight, such as the Bear variants, Manic Jamira and its variants, and Muth variants outside of Autumn with the Stepping Stone. To give a couple of more enemies that Courier can fight thanks to their LD, there's Corrupted Valkyrie, Condemned Pang, and Chick-fil-A. Now, I don't know how many people use First Form D'Artagnan, but if we compare Courier to him, they both have a similar base damage and health, with the only major difference being that D'Artagnan can hit more targets, but keep in mind, D'Artagnan is a Fest unit, which usually tends to be better than your average Uber. Courier also has a slightly farther LD and a slightly bigger blind spot, recharges faster, is cheaper by 120 cents, and performs better against traitless and red enemies. Dart has the same standing range as Courier and has twice the DPS against most traits, but his base DPS without it is not good, only having 1,685 DPS compared to Courier's 3.3k DPS. In stages that feature cursing enemies and or behemoths, it's just better to bring Courier than base form D'Artagnan because of this. Courier has also made plenty of difficult stages basically free, or at the very least, a whole lot easier. Ogre Island is usually considered one of the hardest Manic stages in the game thanks to Manic Island's range and their 17,000 DPS, shredding through most units and one-shotting every meat shield outside a crazed wall and eraser if they don't land a critical hit. As well as the presence of Berserkori, a red enemy with a level 12 wave that deals some pretty crazy damage across the entire stage. However, Courier makes the stage way easier thanks to the abundance of Krokos that spawn, giving Courier several chances to attack Manic Island and Courier's massive damage letting him deal a good amount of damage against Berserkori. Another stage Courier makes basically free is Realm of Carnage. Dark Laser already makes the stage pretty free thanks to her talents, but Courier can easily shred through the boars and land great chip damage against Hanya due to their speed. The only reason why this stage has any difficulty nowadays is because of R-Ost, who still remains a rather difficult enemy mid-game to this day, as most of his counters are either uber rares or are in the late game. Now let's get to another, more relevant point, involving the Behemoth metagame. Now, I don't know what Ponos was smoking when they made Courier, but his damage against Behemoths is really nutty. Courier has a DPH of 17,638 against Behemoths and a DPS of 8,268 against them. They also have about 25,000 health when fighting Behemoths. And remember, these multipliers are, well, multiplicative and not additive, so they ramp up quickly with levels. At level 50, Courier has almost 40,000 health against Behemoths and deals a very impressive 28,000 damage with 13k DPS. This DPS is on par with Divine Kalisa and Blanca from the Street Fighter collab. Against Red Behemoths at level 50 with treasures, their damage is the equivalent to what really good Ubers like Balrog have, and it's very nuts. Courier's amazing stats caused Ponos to realize that they may have been smoking just a little bit too much green in the back, since Courier can easily manhandle Hazuku, Wild Doge, and Scissorrex when given the chance, and we don't even need to talk about Ahurujo. This is one of the reasons why almost every Behemoth enemy released after 11.5 has insane stats, such as the 2 million HP Dark Joe with 27,000 damage to Rajakan with a similar HP amount that will rip anything not named Ramen apart, especially with a 10% chance for a level 2 wave. This is even the worst of it. It's very easy to say that Courier's existence, or rather, the Behemoth Slayer trait as a whole is why in the late game, Wild Doge is 200% and not 150%. A 150% Wild Doge would be manageable with high level erasers. To illustrate you a picture, a 150% Wild Doge would be slightly tankier than a Relic Doge and deal about 2 times the damage of one. A high level Manic Eraser or regular Eraser would be able to shrug off a hit easily. Courier would, however, be able to take it out in 3 hits instead of the 4 hits that it takes with late game Wild Doges. Wild Doge at 200% takes out every single meat shield besides those with the survivability, such as Jianshi and Haniwa Cat, who is only used to tank Wild Doge, and maybe Cumulus, as they have nearly 60,000 health against them. Doesn't mean Haniwa survives more than 1 hit, as a 200% Wild Doge deals 33,000 damage. Now, I could go on a rant about why Behemoth enemies in general kinda suck, but I want to keep this video rather short and relative to Courier. Courier's sheer dominance over the Behemoth meta causes almost every other Behemoth Slayers outside of the UL True Forms and Kana to not be worth using. The only other 2 Behemoth Slayers I'd consider using are Mushroom and Gelato Bros, since Mushroom is on par with Courier in terms of being the second best cheap Behemoth Slayer, and Gelato Bros having very good utility. It can actually deal more DPH against Behemoths than even Courier, but they have less DPS. I see the majority of Legend Zero stages featuring at least 1 Behemoth enemy, and Courier is definitely gonna be on the majority of loadouts just because of how meta they are. Now let's talk about how Courier breaks early game progression. Since Courier can easily be unlocked after Into the Future Chapter 1, you will find its strength in the early game to be absurd, as it could be a very useful unit in so many places. For those who have watched my No Gotcha series, you'll know why I bring Courier almost everywhere. Now that is with no gotcha, where the power level is significantly smaller than allowing gotcha units. Courier can easily carry you through a good chunk of early Stories of Legend because enemies there scale well for how far you usually get in the game, but Courier can easily let you go a lot further than usual, especially before Mina, since a lot of stages tend to be filled with red enemies. Here's a good tip. Courier makes Saint Red Fox a joke of a stage since they can take Lil Neandam out in around 20 hits alone. Keep in mind, Courier isn't going to be the only thing hitting him. Lil Neandam can easily get defeated thanks to Courier's absurd spammability and steamrolling potential. Courier's strengths do slow down eventually when you reach late SOL, but he's still very good there. This doesn't add that general power creep has been affecting SOL by a lot, since it has been over 5 years since it's ended. Stronger things just keep getting added, and now you can easily get through Stories of Legends within a few months tops if you play a sub-chapter or 2 a day. This does, however, have a double-edged sword effect, as Courier allowing you to cruise through loads of the game can easily make you hit a massive wall and stop you from progressing at all. There are some stages that I would like to call unit check stages, name not final. Some examples include Lord of the Abyss, the Infected King, and Haunted Genome, and if the player somehow got to these stages without having certain units, they can and usually will get stuck there. Courier Cat has definitely been very divisive for how its stats are way too good for an early game no gacha unit who is viable in all parts of the game, especially late game where Behemoth enemies are super relevant and is basically required to beat some Behemoth stages without giving yourself a massive headache. Courier also became one of the best units to use against one of the most Powercreep traits in the game, only having a few red enemies be able to counter at all. Courier is also probably why Behemoth enemies can be such a huge pain to fight by having way too good of stats that cause the meta to revolve around them. Courier has also basically broken early game progression, as they are basically an Ultra Souls unit that you can get by the time you beat Into the Future Chapter 2. Now I want to ask you, the audience, how do you feel about Courier Cat? Do you think they're super centralizing in the current Behemoth and or Red meta, or do you think that Courier is overrated? Do you have any other thoughts on Courier? Let me know in the comments section below, and if you enjoyed watching this video, why not give it a like, and if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, go ahead and do so, as it would really help me out in the long term. Anyways, have a wonderful day everyone.